Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Caroline Colas. I'm the Senior Director of Health and Wellness at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan, and your host today on the Positive Psychology Hour, a series that we have been doing with Whole Being Institute through the pandemic. Next week, curator Phoebe Atkinson and the CEO of the Whole Being Institute, Megan McDonough, and I will be celebrating and commemorating our going into our third year, and we hope you will join us. But today we have Katherine Libonate with us, and she's going to be discussing living life with intention. Living with intention means creating a better balanced life that's actually full of meaning and purpose, that's aligned with our values. And each activity that we do, each one that is worthwhile to us, is a vote for the person that we want to be and the person that we identify with. It's stepping out of mindless, automatic, autopilot activities and moving towards a life based on conscious choice. Katherine is a graduate of the Whole Being Institute's Certificate in Positive Psychology program, as many of you are, and some of you are currently enrolled in that program. She's going to share strategies today to help us engage in a more meaningful activities that fuel us, align with our values, and positively influence our lives and well-being. A little bit about Katherine. You're going to find her to be quite an energetic, dynamic, engaging, and highly analytical, results-oriented presenter and leader. She has a diverse background in psychology, sociology, consumer insights, client management, leadership development, and business expansion. So not only does she work in the business field, but she also is a lover of travel. And she founded Happier Journeys, a travel company that curates hassle-free weekend trips and getaways for couples and groups. She has over 20 years working with Fortune 100 companies as a trusted advisor. And her focus is really on building relationships, promoting synergy across business lines, and creating consensus among stakeholders. So sometimes we can, the question really is, how do we create consensus within ourselves, right? We have so many different aspects of our personality and selves. And Katherine's going to address that today, as well as give us some insight on making personal choices that can make a difference. Small changes make a difference. I welcome to the call, Katherine.
Thank you, Caroline. I'm really honored to be here and appreciate everybody sharing their time with me today. And thank you, Phoebe, for inviting me as well and helping to coordinate everything. I know it's quite a bit of work to put all these together, so thank you, especially while you were traveling. But I do have a few slides that I'm going to share today. And before I do get into that, if everybody could make sure you just have a notebook or a piece of paper in front of you and a pen. There are going to be kind of a couple opportunities to just write some thoughts down and to do a little essentially journaling as we go through this exercise. And also feel free to, of course, stop me, ask questions, provide comments. I love having interaction as we go through these sessions. So feel free to interrupt me and ask questions. So before I do get into the slides, I'll just provide a little bit of background on sort of what drove this session for me and the thinking around living a life with intention. So in the beginning of the year, my company, I work for a company called the NPD Group. They're the largest privately held market research firm in the world. We have offices all over the globe. I've been with them for about 17 years. And I have an opportunity to work literally across my entire organization. I am responsible for negotiating our sort of largest, most strategic contracts. And so as part of my organization is very focused on learning and development, which is fantastic. And one of the things that they did at the beginning of the year is they partnered with an organization called Fast Forward Group. And they really asked us to almost envision what our year was going to be like. So to some degree, write a letter to ourselves on as if we are sort of reminiscing on the past year, meaning it's the end of 2022, and we're reminiscing on sort of how this past year shaped up, both personally and professionally. And I think that's really important too, is the organization really embrace not just looking at our professional lives in terms of what metrics did we achieve and what goals, et cetera, but really personally and how we lived into ourselves, and our desires and our ambitions personally. So the work is very similar to the work of Laura King. If those of you are familiar with Laura King's work, where in her exercise, she asks you for, I believe it's 4 days, to really think about your life in the future and imagine everything that has gone well as it possibly could. You know, you've worked hard, you've succeeded at accomplishing your life goals, sort of a realization of your life dreams, right? And there's no time limit on Laura's work, but it really helps kind of bubble up and see synergies across the individual days. So this training was similar to that, but it was a little bit more detailed and had some real poignant questions around, you know, sort of what were your personal outcomes for the year? What was your outlook on life? Describe the quality of your important relationships. And then it also, of course, had some business metrics. So what were some of your business outcomes and how did you achieve those outcomes, and sort of putting some sort of qualifications around those goals. So when we did the training session, there was a pilot group of senior executives who had been through the training prior. And in preparation for the training, these senior executives sat on a panel and they were asked to really share their experiences of going through the training, and really what they learned about themselves, what they found valuable in the exercises, what changed for them, and really just had a great open dialogue. And one of the themes that came up through each of the executives, there were four executives on the panel, and one of the themes that kept coming up for each of them was they felt that they were much more focused on living a life with intention. And they were asked, each of them were asked, well, what does that mean for you? And they all had different answers on really what that meant for them. And so after, when it was time for me to sit down and to really think about this exercise and writing this letter to myself and answering the questions and digging deeper, I kept going back to what they said in terms of, we'll live a life with intention. And I remember thinking in that session, oh, I can do that. That's easy. You know, I've been through whole being training. I know what living a life with intention is. And then I really had to sit down and think about it. And I said, I'm not so sure I know what that means. Let me do a little research. How do we set up a framework so that we do really, truly live a life with intention? And one of the themes that came for me really forcefully was that, you know, when we live with intention, you know, we're wholeheartedly engaging in activities that are worthwhile to us, right? We're mindful about how we spend our time. We're not on autopilot. We're really conscious about, you know, our actions, our reactions, our intention. And for me, I had to really sit down and think about, well, how do I sort of put again, I think the best way for me to say this is to put a framework around it. I have 3 kids. I, you know, work full time. As Caroline mentioned, I also started kind of a separate side business around travel, and I'm a really busy person. And I kind of realized that to some degree I was operating on autopilot, and I wanted that to stop. And so this framework kind of helped me do that. So I'm going to start sharing my slides here really quick, and we'll start digging into this. So let's share here. Just have to touch a few buttons here to make this work. Here. Sorry, I have 2 screens, and so
We can still see the notes.
yeah, here we go. Yeah, I can't get rid of this. I don't know why.
There we go.
Is it gone?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. All right. So living with intention. This. Okay, I don't know why it's not going to the next slide. Always fun when
We can,
technology works. Oh, wait, here we go. All right.
yeah,
So, what is the goal? The goal is to develop a courageous vision for my professional and personal life over the next year. And so that's the exercise that I recently discussed in terms of this. This was the objective for me and for the training session effectively that we went through, was really about setting a bold vision, right? So when I look back on the last year, um, you know, that I really stretched myself in terms of goals, that I really challenged myself in terms of what I wanted to accomplish over the last year. And I was really courageous in those efforts. So again, living a life with intention, it's about balance, right? How do we find a better balanced life that's really full of meaning and purpose for us? When we live with intention, we're wholeheartedly engaging in activities that are worthwhile to us. So what does that framework look like? So the first thing I realized was I needed to get really clear on what my values are. And we're going to talk a little bit about values and how do we really hone in on the values that are really meaningful to us as individuals, that help us, that are really operational into our behaviors. And what does it look like really when we're living into our values and aligned to our values? So we'll talk a little bit about that. The other thing I realized was the importance of really setting healthy boundaries. And this, for me personally, was very important. And I'll talk about that. Establishing what I call non-negotiables, and then tallying the votes. So values. The values determine our priorities. You know, when things that we do and how we behave match our values, life is usually really good, right? We feel satisfied, we feel content. But when activities and behaviors don't align with our values, we feel really uneasy, we feel dissatisfied, and that can be a source of happiness. And so one of the tools that I found to be really useful was Brene Brown has a resource on her website, which I put the source here on this slide, which I think everybody's going to get copies. If not, I can add it in a moment to the chat.
yes,
But
we're going
this
to
is
get copies.
okay, perfect. This is a super great source for really understanding values and a series of questions, which we're actually going to go through as a group here to really help us hone in and identify the values that are important to us. This is just a list of some values. This, I got to pee. There's a lot of values. And so when I first started thinking about this work, it's not as easy as it sounds. It's hard because there's a lot of values that are important to us. I mean, when you look at this list, it's probably, you know, really easy for some of us to sort of hone in on some of these and say, oh, okay, well, you know, I value humor, I value learning, I value the environment, I value excellence, right? There's probably a lot of these values that you feel that resonate with you and that you feel that are important to you in the way that you live your life. And one of the things that's really important about this exercise is to not discount that there's a multitude of values that are important to us. But one of the things that we need to start off doing is to really select kind of 10 to 15, try and narrow it down to 10 or 15 values that are important to us. Is kind of the first step in this exercise. So I'm going to ask each of you, and again, I've only gotten to P here. If there's some values that bubble up for you that are important to you that are not on this list, feel free to write them down. But I'm going to ask each of us to just take a few minutes and just start to write down values that are meaningful to us. And again, when you're thinking about these values, think about you know, values that again are aligned to you. When are you're at your best self? When are you feeling most alive, right? When you're discussing this value with a family member, with a friend, with a coworker, you know, think about how you're sharing a story around this value, you know, whether that's faith or family or any of these other values. Do you literally feel yourself lighten up? Do you get excited? So I'm going to pause now and just ask everybody again to get a piece of paper and a pen just for a few minutes and just start writing. If you get to 10 to 15, great. If you don't get to that many, that's okay too, but just kind of start thinking about some of the values that are meaningful to you.
We had a question, which was,
Uh-huh.
do values correlate
Oops.
with our strengths?
I think they do. And I think the way to relate that is, when you're not living into that value, are you, how are you feeling in that moment, right? Are you feeling like you're enveloping your strength, or you feel like you're not supporting that strength to some degree? So I think they do have a correlation with each other.
Great. And then the screen just switched a little bit to back to.
Yes, I'm going to go
I'm
back.
not sure.
Yeah, I
Okay.
accidentally just touched a button. There we go. There we go. I got to do this again. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I
There
just
we
wanted
go.
you to know.
Are we back?
I see nothing now. There we go.
There we go.
So you're wanting everyone to write down from this list, or just from the top of mind, like 10 values that come on?
You can use this list to help you to get ideas, or if there's other values not on this list, then please feel free. These are your values.
Gotcha.
Okay, I'm going to cover this because I think this is covering some values here. Just give everybody a few minutes to do that.
There's a question: is the rest of the values clarification list in Brene Brown's book?
It's actually, she's got a PDF on this link that has all the values.
Great. So we're kind of speed dating our values. I love that. Oh, and thank you, Rachel. Rachel put in the link for everyone.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Give everybody just a couple more minutes.
What if you like all of them?
I know. So that's the point. It's hard. It is important to start to narrow to 10 to 15 though, but you're right. It's hard.
Does anyone need more time? Let us know in the chat if you do.
Faces on the screen. It looks like everybody stopped writing. Okay. I see some thumbs up. Thank you. Okay. All right. So if would anybody like to share their values either in the chat or not in the chat? If anybody would like to share, I'd love to hear. if you want to take yourself off mute, or if you want to write in the chat. Either one is great if you're open to it.
I'll share mine.
Okay, great.
Giving back, gratitude, health, independence, optimism, learning, kindness, knowledge, achievement, faith, efficiency, freedom, harmony, hope, and intuition.
Great. And how did you, can I ask a question? How did you find the exercise? Was it easy to do, or did you feel
It's interesting. In the beginning, I said, too many words, too much there. I don't really want to do this. And I've done this before, and it was difficult, and I couldn't find the right words. And I read through them all, and I'm glad you gave us more time, because a short amount of time would not have done it for me, because in going back, and I've read them through many times, I really feel that these are an indication of who I am.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yes, and we have some who shared in the chat as well.
Okay.
We had Cara, I don't know if you want to come off mute and share, or you want me to read yours.
I can come off mute. Hi.
Hi.
I tried to stop at 15 and then like my mind kept going. So sorry for listing 17. But my list includes connection, integrity, authenticity, patience, peace, security and simplicity, honesty, grace, forgiveness, making a difference, creativity, time, growth, nature, openness, and curiosity. And I put a question mark with time because like I feel like that could be my sense of connection to time might be a little bit different than somebody else's.
That's great.
It's a great list.
That's a fantastic list. And then I'll read a few more. So grace and curiosity from Teresa. Some I chose are aspirational from Rachel. I think that's fantastic. Let's see, altruism, ambition, kindness, knowledge, optimism, loyalty, integrity, independence, and creativity from Ethel. Hope, justice, and ethic from Esperanza. Elaine, I feel strongly about my choices, but sad that I didn't choose some like creativity. And doing what you say will do, a value, prioritized, observed, and passed on by my mother from Robert. Thank you. So for some of us, this was, you know, it asked us to do a little soul searching to really hone in on these values. For some of us, it's sometimes challenging. For some of us, it's how do I pick 10, right? We all have different experiences when we think about our values. The next part of the exercise is challenging, and I'm not going to deny that. What we're asked to do is to take the 10 or 15 and hone them down to 2. And that almost sounds impossible. And so for me, I had to really, really spend some time thinking about this. So for me, for example, I'll give a couple of examples of values that I had and how I was able to take those values and think about how those values kind of ladder up to my core 2 values. So for example, parenting is one of my values. And the other thing, let me just back up for 1 second and say, your values, your 2 core values, once you are able to lean into both of those and really identify with both of those, they may change over time. There may be one that sticks with you for a very long time, and there may be a second that sort of evolves over time, depending on where you are in your life. Or those 2 may stick with you forever. So the one thing is that these values are not necessarily stuck to forever. They may ebb and flow and change a little bit. So for me, parenting is a value. Patience is also a value, and courage is a value. And so when I looked at those three together, I realized that of those three, the one that's most predominant for me is really courage. And I had to think about that in terms of, so even if I just look at patience and parenting and compare the two together. So in my parenting, I value recognizing that the steps of parenting and child development, one of the things that I have to remind myself with my kids, I have 3 boys, is that some things have a way of working itself out. I'm also a problem solver by nature. And so I had this sort of notion, I think, for years in parenting that I kind of had to step in and solve problems. And then I realized that patience actually serves me well in my parenting. And so that's a value that I started to really embrace. And so for me, in order to be, I guess, a good parent, or the kind of parent that I want to be, or to raise my children to see me in a way that they kind of can blossom and learn on their own. In order to be an effective and good parent, I had to be patient, right? So patience became more predominant for me over parenting. And then when I added courage into the mix, I thought, well, I actually need the courage to be patient, because that's something that I find when I'm courageous, then I'm at my best self. So I had to kind of look at my 10 to 15 and really start to figure out which are the predominant values and how do other values funnel up into that. Okay.
Elizabeth has a question.
Yep.
I don't know if you, Elizabeth, did you want to come off mute?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm just curious sometimes, and I'm not talking about the top 2, but let's say in the top 10, sometimes there are values that we appreciate when we see it in others and we strive for them, but maybe they're difficult for us, like patience, like you were mentioning. Mm-hmm. So do we still consider that a value, even though it's something that's challenging for us?
I would say it could be a value on your 10 to 15. It's not a predominant value for you, because if you're forcing it to some degree, right, you're aspiring to that value, it's not core to who you are. So it's still important to you, and it's something that you're going to pay attention to. It's something that you're potentially working on. It's something that you want to make present and aware, but it's not deep core into who you are. It's to some degree, think about it like your value isn't always going to come naturally to you, right? Like there's going to be situations where you're not living into that value, or you make a decision or an action and you say, ooh, that is not who I am, and that's not my value, and that feels really uncomfortable. But the majority of time, you're really kind of, I would say, feeding into that core value, and you're really embracing it and living it. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? No. Okay. So we're not going to do the exercise of finding your 2 values because it takes time and it takes a lot of self-reflection. However, there are some questions to help you. Of course, I'm going to freeze again here. I don't know why this keeps happening to me.
Maybe it's because we're supposed to look at the values a little bit longer.
That's right.
Dale was able to get it down to 2. She said family and love.
Oh, well, there you go. So Dale, do you want to share while I'm trying to fix my computer here? Oh my gosh, I don't know why this is happening. Oh, here we go.
Yes, and I found it interesting listening to what a few people shared, because mine immediately popped up to family and love. And it's just the driving force of my life.
Beautiful.
So in essence, like there's some of the questions that we, as you're honing in on those 2, these are some of the core questions to really ask yourself of each of the values. So does this value define me, right? And I think that goes to the earlier question that we had. So yeah, we can have values that are aspirational, but at the core, and get a partner for this too. I mean, one of the things that I found is that I had a conversation with my best friend when I was looking at my values, and I had a conversation with a coworker who knows me really well, with my husband, solicit help in this exercise. Because again, as I mentioned, when you're talking about your two values and you're really discussing with somebody why you picked these two values, they're gonna see in you that your face is going to light up. You're going to get more energetic about those two values that you selected. Is this who I am at my best?
Hang on, we've got some interesting things happening in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Ethel said altruism and humor. Patrice said trust and connection. Francesca, integrity and making a difference. And Susan said, this was easier for me than picking the first 15. I choose giving back and gratitude. I feel I have those two values. All other ones come along and it provides a very fulfilling life for me. And then Robert had an interesting thing to say. He said, respectively, parenting is not a value. It's sort of an activity. I bet an often all-consuming one. Patience, sure, is a value, but parenting isn't and shouldn't have been included in this list. So we even have a value of like an evaluation of what values are, right?
Yeah. I think that's a great point. Some of the other questions.
Yeah, well, it's just interesting that, we are highly individuals. For some of us, it's easier to make a short list than a long list. I find that interesting.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
I love that too.
I love how we're all different.
Yeah.
We can see your screen, by the way. It's back into sort of.
Yeah, unfortunately, for some reason, when I do presentation mode, it keeps freezing. So I'm going to maybe not do that, if that's okay.
All right, sure.
Okay.
Whatever works.
So when you're looking at your values, again, trying to hone in on those two, there's some additional questions that can be helpful. And again, for some of you, if the two are coming up and it's not a problem, fantastic. If for others of you, you're kind of struggling a little bit to come up with the two, these questions can also be helpful. So really think about one or two behaviors that really support that value. And then, one or two slippery behaviors sort of that are outside of that value. So I'll just use mine as an example. So courage is one of my core values. And when I did some reflection and I looked back on my life, I realized that in times where I had an opportunity to be courageous and I didn't pursue that opportunity, it just didn't sit well with me. I don't want to say like I almost like that sick to my stomach feeling. I mean, I really had to pay attention to sort of my body and, how that experience felt to me. And so, one of the things that I really challenged myself on is to continue to live into my courageousness. And I have a tendency I call it analysis paralysis, which prevents me from being courageous. And I've tried to really work on myself and again, recognize that I feel at my best self and I have my most success when I am courageous. And so I need to support that value. And think about a time when you were, really fully living into that value. Again, kind of helps to hone in those two values. Okay. So that's value. So for me, in terms of the framework, the value sort of starts everything, right? So if I know my two values, then I can really center around how do I live my life with attention around those two values, right? It helps me make decisions in terms of how I spend my time. It helps me think about how I respond to situations. It just helps me live into my best self. The second is around setting healthy boundaries. And again, for me, this became super important, right? We only have so much time in the day. And, we want to, as individuals, serve that time well, right? So if, a value is around, health, for example, are we making sure that we're setting boundaries around the way that we spend our time and the activities that we make so that we can live into the health, right? Are we getting enough sleep? Are we setting boundaries around sleep? Are we setting boundaries around what we say yes to and what we say no to. One of the things that I keep reminding myself is no is a complete sentence. You know, especially as a parent and raising 3 kids and working full time, I volunteer for a lot of organizations. I'm on the PTA, and I got to a situation where I was saying yes way too many times, and you know, not living into my value. And again, for me, courage as the value, I had to have the courage to say no. So setting really healthy boundaries is very, very important. And creating space and an opportunity to really commit to those values, to flourish and to achieve your dreams. You know, they could be other boundaries around, you know, again, in your professional life, you know, making sure that you're not, you're very open with your manager in terms of how you work best. I mean, that's one of the things that's happening in the workplace right now is a lot of companies are really understanding that as employees, we need a bit more flexibility. And so, for example, if it's having a conversation with your manager and saying, you know, these noontime meetings don't work for me. I work at my best when I know I can sit down for 30 minutes or 40 minutes or whatever the case may be. And I have lunch and I take a walk, and then I'm much more productive at 1 o'clock for that meeting. So it's, you know, whatever it is for you, but spending some time and really thinking about how do I protect sort of myself and my values and set some boundaries around those. Any questions on that from anybody before we get to the next one?
Let's see. You have to be fortunate to have a manager that will cater to your needs. That's really interesting, Debbie, because my understanding from leadership is almost like take care of your people and they'll take care of your customers. Is that more of the way business is sort of going, especially in this sort of age of the Great Resignation? Are we seeing more and more of that?
I think we're seeing more and more of that. I mean, I'm seeing it. So I'm fortunate in that the company that I work for, we work with pretty much every, if you buy a product, we work with the company that sells that product. So from a Target to a manufacturer. So we work with, you know, every Fortune 500 company, and in my interaction, and again, every company is different, and we'll see, right? I think this time period is changing very rapidly. But I think companies are starting to realize that one, if we're going to be successful, we need to be embracing of our employees and who they are as individuals and their whole self, right? I mean, again, there have to be some parameters, right? But I mean, I'm seeing employees really start to have conversations with their employers and talk about how they work best and when they work best, and how do we have an arrangement around where we both can be successful. Now, you know, there's obviously certain meetings that need to be attended to, and there's timelines and there's deadlines, and how do you balance all that? But I do think companies are recognizing sort of human capital, you know, that's like the GDP, right? So in order for us to get the growth that we're looking for, we need to take care of our people and embrace what our people need. And how do we take that in terms of, you know, that's what we need then as a company, and shift that mindset.
Yeah, and Deirdre was saying, someone was saying, sadly, there are a lot of bad managers out there, right?
Yeah.
I like to think of it as people that aren't living in their strengths, right? Sometimes people are promoted or in a position where it's not really where their strength lies, and they may be burnt out too, right? So I'm seeing that the stress on management is pretty enormous as well. So what I love about positive psychology is we can look at, gosh, it's tough right now, or this person is very rigid, or as one of the people in the chat was saying. Yeah, Debbie was saying, I agree with all, but I think my manager's value is rigidity.
I have one of those managers, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So it is a bit of a dance, isn't it?
It's a bit of a dance. I mean, I'll personal story. I have a manager who's very rigid. And I can absolutely relate to that. She does not bring her whole self to work. She never talks about, you know, anything. There's no human side to her. And I'm not saying she's inhumane. I don't mean it that way, but like she very much has this is work. And then I have a separate life. And that's exhausting. I mean, I look at her and I think to myself, that has got to be absolutely exhausting. And it's, you know, as employees, you know, how do we, and it's hard, right? How do we potentially shed light to someone like that in a different way? Or do we change our situation, right? So, and sometimes we can't. So it's how do we potentially take baby steps to see if we can sort of build a different relationship with somebody like that, which is not easy.
Yeah, you know, I was so interested in your bio about creating consensus, and yet we need to do a dance. And I think Deirdre was saying, or maybe you have to be an advocate for yourself and demonstrate leadership by asking for what you need to be your most effective, productive self. It's kind of like someone once said to me, if you're in a relationship with manager employee relationship with someone, you're essentially doing a dance, let's say. And if you change, if you're doing a tango and you suddenly start doing the waltz, they have to adjust, right? So we do have some ways, right? Some impact, and that feeling of helplessness is interesting, because I think some of us feel that way right now about what's happening in Ukraine, for example. How
Yeah.
do we get into agency, as Phoebe was talking? I know some of you might have missed it, but Phoebe was talking about, you know, Marty Seligman was saying the world's on fire, and right now we're entering an age of agency. How can we get into action? And I hear you saying that, Katherine, by saying, okay, well, what are our values? Let's start there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the next is related to boundaries, but it's putting a little bit more structure around boundaries. And again, almost similar to the value exercise. Like there's going to be some boundaries, but then there's going to be a couple things that are just what I call non-negotiable. So what are the non-negotiables for you that help you live into your values? And so when I say non-negotiables, it's again, it's probably not going to be, you know, 10 or 15 things. It's just a few things that family, let's use family. Let's say family is one of your core values, right? This actually happened to me. I had a work trip. This was years ago. This is my family, by the way, on the right-hand side. So this is me and my husband and my 3 boys. So family, so let's just say family is one of my core values. I had a work trip a few years ago when my middle one was turning, this was many years ago, actually, he was turning 1. And, you know, this particular trip was right on his 1st birthday. And I chose the trip over staying here for his birthday because I felt that I had to. And at the time, I hadn't done the values exercise. At the time, I didn't have any boundaries. At the time, I didn't know my non-negotiables, but I didn't feel good about that choice. And I really, like, I'm going to get like teary-eyed thinking about it now. It was horrible. I mean, I can't even underestimate, and to even admit this to people, right? I don't think I've told that many people that I did that. It really tore me up. And, you know, I remember my husband saying, well, he's 1, he doesn't know, and he'll never remember, and blah, blah, blah. And I kept thinking, well, that may be, but someday in his life, I feel like I have to tell him that, or do I tell him that? And it just tore me up. And so at that moment, that was one of my non-negotiables. And this was even before doing all this work. I said, I will never, ever, ever miss a child's birthday again for a work trip. And so that was for me, right? And there could be other non-negotiables. And so in this exercise, we're not going to do it now, but when you're thinking about your non-negotiables, again, it's kind of writing a list, right? What are the things that are really important to you that help you live into your values? But what is non-negotiable? So, you know, maybe, you know, health or alone time or peace is one of your values. And to support that value, you know that meditation is very important to you. That's a non-negotiable, right? You're going to meditate at least 5 minutes a day as an example. And again, these are examples. That's a non-negotiable. And one of the things that I find too about the non-negotiables is you share your non-negotiables with the people who mattered most to you. So whether it's a non-negotiable at work, whether it's in your family life, whatever the case may be, but make sure that those around you who support you understand this is your non-negotiable. You know, exercising 30 minutes a day, or if, you know, again, family and friendship is a value for you. How are you living into that friendship or family relationship? Is it, well, my friends are critically important to me, so I'm going to make sure I call a friend once a week. That's actually something that's, friendship is not one of my core values. But actually I live on the East Coast. A lot of my friends live on the West, or I live on the West Coast. A lot of my friends live on the East Coast. I mean, I realized in the pandemic, I had gone for years without talking to friends, that I couldn't believe it. And I said, oh, this is something that's going to become a priority for me. And it actually did become a non-negotiable. I spend Sunday morning calling a friend of mine every week. And I rotate the group of friends. Instead of texting and, you know, Instagram and all that, it's physically having a conversation on the phone. So I just, again, this helped me personally, making sure that I'm not looking back on my year and saying, oh, I just missed out on all these opportunities. I look back on the year and say, I really embraced my values and what's important to me and supporting those values. And I made sure that I didn't bend the rules on those either. And that's kind of what the non-negotiables are. Any questions on that?
We've got a bunch of
Caroline, you're off mute.
comments.
Yeah.
We've got a bunch of comments. Hang on.
Okay, great.
As I said earlier, I feel self-love is the primary value necessary for attaining all other values. Some of these are excellence, but not working on Shabbat is, of course, a core non-negotiable value for many Jews. This being a Jewish community-sponsored event, but for me as an independent contractor, Sunday is potentially, though events may interfere like any other day. It mattered that you knew, and it clearly still does. Can you hear it in your voice how much it still hurts your heart, right? When you were talking about missing your son's birthday.
Yeah.
And Debbie said, and others have said, beautiful family, love the picture.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's interesting because that story revealed that life's an improvisation. Right? We live it, and then we get information. Wow, wrong way, or let me go this direction. Right? It's not like we have all of the signposts ahead of time and we have a map, right? So especially we've learned that in the pandemic, right? That agility and the ability to shift and change and adjust, I think we've all, whether we like it or not, have gotten just by living through it, better at that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Just to survive, even if you don't feel like you're that happy about having to do that, we've had to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
It's true. It's true.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting what you say about, you know, we learn through experiences, right? So on Sunday, my phone broke and my screen cracked and I couldn't use my phone. And I had this, you know, like, well, I had this panic moment. I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to survive without a phone? Even though I am old enough to remember what it was like not to have a phone. And unlike some people that I work with, you know, that's a foreign concept to them. And so, but I did, you know, kind of have a moment of panic and I was like, oh, it'll be fine, you know? And so then I went to a store on Monday and they said, yes, they could, you know, fix my phone. It was basically just a cracked screen. And they said, you know, we'll have it to you this afternoon. And I thought, oh, okay, this is great. And I realized throughout the day how liberating it was not to have my phone. And I also realized how much more present I was, that I wasn't, I mean, I would, again, because your phone is kind of like well, for me, I thought it was my lifeblood. I mean, just even little things like, if I was waiting for a conference call to start and a Zoom or whatever, and I'd have 2 minutes, I would open up the New York Times and like quickly read an article or something, or, look at a photo that somebody had sent, or send a quick text, and your brain is just kind of bouncing around constantly because of with your on and off your phone. And without having that phone, I realized I was more peaceful, I was more present, I was calmer, I didn't feel my heart racing, I was, more present with my kid, it's just everything. And so it ended up taking them a couple more days to fix my phone. It was the best couple of days of my life. And I just thought about that, saying, okay, so how am I going to break up with my phone going forward, right? How am I going to have a different relationship with my phone and use this opportunity to now set some new boundaries potentially for myself? Or do I have a non-negotiable around it? I don't know. So,
Right.
but you're right. It's like just simple experiences like that can really change how you think about something.
Right. And, I was having a sort of an exchange with one of the folks on the chat about we had the Brain Health Awareness Week last week, and we started the week on Monday with Dr. Sherry Kelly talking about digital technology and its impact on the brain as we age, and how it actually slows down, because the brain, our functioning and our ability to respond, because the brain is not meant to be receiving that kind of stimulation, rapid stimulation all of the time. And maybe what I'll do is, include that with the recordings this week, so that you guys can also hear that if you missed it last week. Debbie had an interesting question. She said, "What do you do with the shoulds?"
Can you elaborate a little on that?
Debbie, do you want to come off mute and elaborate on that?
Sure. Just when, for example, you say exercise 30 minutes every day, I know that I should do that. And I know I should value exercise, and yet there is a part of me, I guess, that, has a competing demand that, usurps it.
No, it's a good question. So yeah, it's let's use I think exercise is a good example. And again, this is not to say these are the ones that you need to pick as your non-negotiables. These were examples, but if health is one of your core values, and you're at your best when you're focused on your health, whether that's your brain health, whether that's your physical health, whether that's anything, however you define health, right? If part of it is you realize that you are at your best and you're living into that value when you commit to exercise 30 minutes every day, whether that's a walk, whether that's yoga, whatever that exercise looks like, that may have to be something that is a non-negotiable for you, right? Like you are going to make sure you commit to a time. It becomes a habit potentially. You're going to make sure that everyone around you knows, like, this is my time and I'm prioritizing this 30 minute. So the non-negotiables are not, I guess they're not the shoulds, right? They're like, I'm going to do these, right? I'm committing to this. I'm married to this, and I'm going to do it no matter what. Now, there's life happens, right? Something may happen and you can't, but it's, what are the couple of things that you really can stick to and that you're willing to stick to?
It seems to me, Katherine, like we're talking about the non-negotiables are pointing to, and the values are pointing to our why. In other words, why I'm doing what I'm doing. And when I'm really connected to my why, then it's like a no-brainer. And when I'm not connected to that, it's like easy to listen to that part of me that kind of is maybe a little bratty or a little afraid or a little like, oh, the weather outside, it's kind of cold, I don't think I'm going to go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to, two quick things first. So this is, I call it tally the votes. And I loved this quote. And I will profess that in the whole being positive psychology session, there's an area where we talk about habits. And I was resistant. I will be completely transparent. I was resistant to the habits, and I'll tell you why. And it's related to the last question, because I felt like it was something else I needed to add to my list of things to do, right? Like it's something I should do. I should meditate every day, or I should practice yoga, or I should drink more water, or like it just felt very overwhelming to me. And I realized that I wasn't necessarily thinking about habits in, I don't want to say the right way, but I needed to think about them in a different way. And what changed me was actually reading this quote from James Clear. The quote is, "Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. No single instance will transform your beliefs, but as the votes build up, so does the evidence of your new identity." So again, I'm going to go back to the courage. So when I think about courage, I think about that's my core value. So every action that I take, is it a vote towards living into that value of courage? And it could be little things, it could be baby steps, but that's sort of my my compass to some degree, and my guidepost. And I remember this quote for that reason. So I don't necessarily think about them in terms of habits anymore. I think about more in terms of votes. So am I voting towards actions that live into that value? So if that just helps everybody, again, and it can kind of help you too if you're having trouble sort of narrowing to your values. And then I this quote too, I thought was really powerful. You know, we first make our habits, and then our habits make us, right? So they, you know, they kind of don't become habits anymore. They're who we are as individuals. And I know we only have a couple quick minutes left, so I'll go to the next, just kind of wrap everything up. So again, what is living with intention? It's really stepping out of mindless activities, no longer operating on autopilot, and moving towards a life based on the conscious choices that we make. Again, kind of circling back to the votes, setting boundaries, setting some non-negotiables, and setting out each day to really engage in meaningful activities that fuel us. So how do we design our lives, create activities around that fuel into our values and allow us to be present, and positively influence our lives and our well-being. And that's it.
Amazing. Amazing. I love this idea about voting. Like, what is getting, my vote
Yes,
with
it
by
changed it for me,
actions?
but I just thought about that. Maybe because I'm a little
Yes.
political too. I don't know, but
Right,
the
exactly.
idea of
That's what I was
voting.
thinking. Yeah. Well, Katherine, I just have to thank you so much. This has been amazing. Now, some of you mentioned that you were having trouble getting on the call. If you were, would you just put that in the chat and let me know what happened, if the email didn't work for you, or so I can know how many people that affected and get that taken care of. And then let's just, I wanted to tell everybody about what we're doing next week, so that you can, and thank Katherine, of course. I mean, this has been extraordinary, but let me tell you what we're doing next week. First of all, on Thursday, we are going to be celebrating with Megan and Phoebe the 2-year anniversary of these calls, which is phenomenal. And that we're actually going into the 3rd year of COVID, which is daunting, right, Katherine, to think about. And I think that next Tuesday, we're going to be talking about envisioning your family at its best with Michelle Brody. And then on Thursday, it is our anniversary and moving into our 3rd year and what we need to know about that. And as we were talking earlier, Marty Seligman was talking about this is the year of agency, right? And how we're going to do that. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Megan and Phoebe. And Katherine, any final thoughts before we go?
I just want to thank everybody for being here today. It's so much fun spending this hour with everybody. So thank you for sharing your time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And what an engaging group. You guys,
I know.
you
Thank you
really
so
were
much.
engaging.
I love the chats and the participation. And so thank you. And I love hearing your voices. So
Yeah, it made it,
yeah.
it makes it, it always makes it fun. It's always fun, but it makes it fun when you all participate. So thank you everybody for joining us today. We will see you, I hope, next week. Have an amazing weekend and a remarkable day. And thank you to our speaker, Katherine,
Thank you,
really, once
Caroline.
again.
So nice to
Take
spend
care.
time with you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Take care, everybody. I'll see you next time.